Hi, I'm Chris Webb, and I'm a principal coastal scientist with the firm Moffett and Nickel, and we're in Orange County, California. And I'm here to talk a little bit about sea level rise and sand along beaches and about new state guidance that's come out in 2024. So this is just some background information for your consideration when thinking through ramifications of sea level rise on the city of Newport Beach. So sea level rise in Southern California is very gradual. It has been very slow for the last 100 years, and it's still moderately slow. And there's a couple of reasons for that. One of the reasons is that this coastline that we live along is called an emerging coast. It's not a trailing coast, which is what they have along the East Coast, where it's flat and it's low. But it's an emerging coast, which means it's not flat. It's backed by bluffs and cliffs along a large portion of it, and it's really slowly rising over time. That's because two tectonic plates slide past each other just to the east of us behind the mountains along the San Andreas Fault. And as Southern California slightly moves northward, it butts up against the plate that's stationary, and it forces some mountain building activity and gradual rise of the shore, which actually counteracts in a very subtle way and very small scale way sea level rise. The other reason that sea level rise is slowed in Southern California is that our ocean water is cold in temperature. We receive water from the north. The North Pacific Ocean between the equator and the North Pole circulates in a large gyre or current that heads in a clockwise direction from the Eastern Pacific Ocean in California, west toward Asia, and north along the Asian coast up to the North Pole area. And then it moves south again towards Southern California. So it's a big clockwise gyre, and we have cold water coming down to us from the north, which is actually more dense than warm water, and it suppresses sea level rise a bit because on the opposite side of the ocean, where the water is warmer along the Asian coast, water expands just from thermal expansion, and sea level rise is more prevalent and more observed and measured and able to be detected. So we're fortunate we have a couple of things working in our favor to reduce sea level rise rates. And what I'll do is show you a slide. And what I'm going to do is share my screen to make that happen. And you'll be able to see, bear with me just a moment to open up my computer screen, and you'll be able to see the slide. So it shows that sea level rise on this slide right here has been very gradual over time from the early 1900s up until almost the present. This is data that's maybe 5 years old, and it shows that it's just risen a fraction of an inch. It's 1/20th of an inch per year over time. And that rate is still occurring, but the predictions are that after 2020, that rate, if it were to continue as it's doing, it would be relatively modest in the next 120 or so years. However, it's predicted to accelerate and go upward and follow one of these colored lines. The red line is an average intermediate condition. The purple line is a little bit higher than that. And these are all dependent on emissions of carbon from various industries and from automobiles, et cetera. So if sea level rise occurs as is projected, we're going to see it, and it won't be too far out into the future. So the state of California has put together some guidelines for us to follow to try to translate sea level rise projections and correlate them over time with future horizon dates. Okay. So in 2018, the state of California issued their original set of guidelines that suggested sea level rise might be on the order of 2 meters, which is about 6.5 feet, by the year 2100. Okay, well, that's a bit alarming for everybody, and it causes everybody to try to think hard about it and make some decisions on what to do. And then there was an extreme rate of sea level rise. They said it could actually reach up to 3 meters or roughly 10 feet. on the high end, on the extreme end. And everybody was required to examine that or consider that scenario in their planning. So that was a 6-year period of time that we all worked with those projections. And the state of California then revised their guidelines in 2024 and came out with a new set of guidelines. And when they did that, they slightly relaxed the sea level rise projections over time, meaning it's not quite so high in year 2100. Instead of 2 meters, it's closer to 1 meter to maybe 1.5 meters, which is somewhere between 3 1/3 feet and 4.9 feet. Nothing to sneeze at. It's not small stuff, but it's still not 2 meters. And then the high projection of 3 meters, nearly 10 feet, was dropped altogether. And the reason these guidelines were ratcheted down a little bit is that the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, that's an international organization, did another assessment. And their conclusion was that ice sheet melt wasn't quite as swift as what had been assumed originally, so they were able to modify the projections. The projections will probably be updated in the year 2030 again. So every 6 to 8 years, I think the state intends to do it, maybe more often if they can manage to do that. So we should have a living document that gives us better information as we move forward. There was also the question about shoreline erosion of beaches, erosion of bluffs, and that's occurring in Southern California right now in a number of areas. It's occurring in San Clemente as one example of an extreme condition. It's also occurring in San Diego County, Los Angeles County, Ventura County, Santa Barbara County, and Orange County for that matter, but not so much in North Orange County. The reason that's occurring is not due to sea level rise, because we're not seeing sea level rise rates be very accelerated yet or very high. It's more due to lack of sand supply to the shoreline. Sand has always been supplied to the shoreline, rivers primarily, but also to some extent by bluffs. But the rivers have been dammed and they've been modified for flood control purposes. So there's much less sediment coming out of the rivers to the shoreline to feed the coast. So the coast is in a deficit of sand supply, which basically means as sand moves along the shoreline from one place to another, wherever it leaves from, there's not a lot of sand returning back to that point. So without man's intervention, beaches will continue to erode. So what man has started to do is nourish the beaches with new sand being supplied from outside of the system. And a good example is in North Orange County, the federal government, the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, has been dredging sand from offshore of Surfside Colony since 1959, approximately every 10 years, and placing it up on the beach at Surfside Colony for it to act as a, quote, feeder beach, which would feed sand to not just Surfside Colony, but also to the downcoast beaches as sand moves from north to south through Sunset Beach, Bolsa Chica, Huntington Beach, and Newport Beach. And if it effectively gets all the way down to Newport Harbor entrance. So it feeds approximately a 15-mile length of coast. And it's worked magnificently. Our beaches are wide for the most part. We don't have some of the same erosion problems as other locations. So San Diego Association of Governments is planning to do this in the San Diego region again. They've done small scale projects twice. They intend to do a larger scale project now in the next 5 years. South Orange County is planning to do it because they have virtually no sand coming in. They've had virtually no nourishment anytime recently. So there are entities now that are mobilizing to place more sand on the beach and restore beaches back to their widened condition, because beaches can serve as important buffer during sea level rise. It's called an adaptation strategy, which means if beaches can be widened and elevated, they can provide a buffer distance between the ocean and backshore development during sea level rise, and beaches can adjust. They can rise and they can retreat naturally and gradually as sea levels rise and retreat too. The beaches rise and retreat at the same rate because waves collect the material, push it up on the beach, create the bars, and the beach then dissipates the wave energy. So they are in sync with it. and they are a really good adaptation strategy. So with that now, I'm going to stop talking and let you folks answer questions. And thank you very much for the opportunity to be here.
The city currently addresses sea level rise through various methods, and one of those things is through our coastal development permit process. And so when someone comes in and wants to rebuild their home, for example, we have to ensure that that home is going to be safe for the next 75 years, because that's the life of the structure. So what we do is we prepare a coastal hazards report, and that tells us the necessary steps to ensure the safety of that home, reasonable safety.
Is that there's certain things you may not even think about in terms of potential sea level rise that we're talking about. And one is about groundwater rise. And that is recently, people who are on the peninsula particularly understand the water table is very high, and that problems with dealing with some sort of structures like parking structures and basements and so forth. And that's likely to increase in the future. So how will it affect how foundations are constructed, how underground parking is done, how underground utilities are done? That's something that going to have to be addressed. Another big challenge we're going to have is that particularly if we have to raise some of the protective devices like bulkheads around the harbor, how is that going to affect public access? How are we going to get people to and along the shoreline? Major priority of the Coastal Act in our LCP. So likewise, public views to along the coastline have to be protected.
I live in Cannery Village, but I was born on Babel Island and spent a lot of time in what you could call the coastal areas of Newport Beach. And I'm obviously now part of the general plan. There's a question earlier around would Newport Beach consider managed retreat? And I hope the answer is a resounding hell no. I really believe that what makes Newport great are many of these gemstones of our community that bring us close to the coast. It's so special that we are this close to that ecosystem. And granted, there are challenges involved with that. But I also think there's legitimate answers to how we can plan for this. There's also a spectrum. There's a few realities. There's a spectrum of outcomes. We could have really serious sea level rise. We might, as we mentioned, maybe it's not as bad as we think. I'm not a scientist by background. I just happen to care about this. I've gotten involved over the years. If you were to tell me that there was a 10% chance that my business was at risk, and there was a 90% chance that it was going to be completely fine, we would build a damn good plan to make sure that our business was not at risk. Maybe the odds here are higher than that, but I don't think it really matters. I think that anytime you have a fundamental risk that challenges the values of the community deserves a plan that respects the quality of the community. And that's what's kind of pulled me into this issue. And I hope that we can do that. I think we have the vulnerability assessment, we have a lot of the data in front of us, and I think that we're missing a comprehensive plan of what our values are and how we would react given a scenario that could come our way or might not. I don't think we can answer what the severity will look like on this panel today. There is that opportunity now with the general plan, and I hope that any of you that care about it get involved. And I will give a lot of credit to the city and to Nancy and the people who are managing the general plan. Like, all of the comments are read and addressed and pulled into how we think about building that plan. So the time is really now, and I approach this opportunity and the way that we approach challenges like sea level rise with a lot of optimism. I don't think this is a fatalistic endeavor. I really think that we just need to have a really good plan to stick to it, and we're totally capable of doing that.
And the creativity that's out there right now that people are coming up with regards to adapting to this and anticipating it are pretty incredible. This is an amazing country. We are brilliant, and people are coming up with wild ideas. And we drop back to the old-fashioned way of either raise it up or push it back or wall it off or do a combination of all that stuff, right? So that costs money. And a funding stream needs to be identified. The coastal cities are they are the revenue generator primarily. And I don't think you necessarily get it back to the degree that you probably should. So political pushes to Sacramento would be really good. And I know I'm going way off the point that you asked me, but banding together with other coastal cities and other coastal regions will make the Southern California voice louder.
And that there was a Senate bill passed recently that requires cities and counties and other jurisdictions to plan for sea level rise. So by 2034, we're required to come up with an adaptation plan if we want to be eligible for a large amount of funding from the state. And so I think that the state has prioritized this issue and that there is a lot of funding out there. So at the staff level right now, we are investigating opportunities to find funding from other sources, such as from the state. I think too, going back again to the Surfside Sunset Project, the interesting thing about that is that we pay a very teeny tiny amount towards that project, which is wonderful. But what it means is that we're on the federal government and the state government's timeline. So as just mentioned, it's supposed to happen every 5 years. I think the last time it took 10 years. So the federal government pays for 67% of that, the millions, and the state fills in the rest. And of that, we pay 1% of the state's obligation, and that's in the hundreds of thousands. So you can imagine the cost for beach nourishment if we go it alone.
Add one thing is, of course, the elephant room is the actual California Coast Commission, because ultimately, anything we have in terms of policy or actual adaptation plans is going to have to go through them. And they're going to have original permit jurisdiction over a number of the areas that will be involved in these strategies. So either it's going to be within their jurisdiction or appealable to them, or they're going to have a say in it and be adopted as a form of policy in our local coastal program. And it is difficult because they are always challenged for time. It's difficult to get feedback from them, but you're going to have to bring them into the process as early as possible.
I'd like to add to another point if possible that state and federal regulations typically constrain what you do. So whatever's conceived or whatever is proposed has to go through their gauntlet of approval. And it's not always in your favor. But it is possible to do it. Okay, so one way to make your road a little smoother is to band together, like I said already, with other coastal cities and the County of Orange. What the County of Orange is starting to do is band together with other counties, such as San Diego, Los Angeles, Ventura, and Santa Barbara. Those 5 counties from Point Conception to Mexico are starting to come together on a regular basis and talk about building beaches and which is an adaptation strategy for sea level rise. And the Coastal Commission likes that. They like the soft solution, the nature-based solution to protect against sea level rise. And building beaches is the first line of defense, like I said. So there's already a movement afoot to try to come together as a Southern California region. And if you can insert yourself into that as an energetic, active, and productive member, that would work in your favor, because there's also money out there. The state has issued Proposition 4 recently, which is a lot of money to do sea level rise planning and adaptation, emphasized in a nature-based way.
You know what a groin is?
It's not a body part. Although I pulled mine 2 weeks ago. It's a rock structure that extends from the beach out into the water, and it's about 13 feet above sea level, so it's high, and it's about 300 feet long, and it's rubble mound, they call it, which is rocks stacked together and nested together to create kind of a barrier. So it extends out perpendicular to the beach. So as sand and water moves along the shore, it intercepts the groin and then gets deflected and has to go around the groin. And in that motion, it slows down, and sand will drop out because it slows down the current If you were drifting on a boogie board along the shore and you approach the groin, you would hit the groin and then go around the groin. So does that make sense? And there's data out there.
I've seen in Australia some pretty interesting artificial reef work. Is that also to deflect this sand or retain our sand? And are you guys looking at those opportunities as well?
Yeah, that's a good question. The answer is yes. Australia is ahead of us in that regard. They're setting the pace, and we're taking notes and applying lessons learned and examples from their projects and proposing to install them in Southern California. The first one is being proposed in Oceanside, just south of Oceanside Pier. There's a desire to install a reef with beach nourishment on the beach. What the reef does, where there's no reef, waves can come in from the ocean and come straight to shore, and all the energy is expended on the sand and up on the beach, and waves can run up real high, and they can, reach development, basically. Where there's a reef, what happens is the reef it's not a groin. It's more of a mound that sticks up and has a face on it that sticks out of the water that the waves reach, and they break on the reef, and they expend their energy on the reef. And so behind the reef, there's a shadow zone of energy. So as sand moves along the coastline, it's being pushed by energy, by waves and currents, and then it suddenly comes into the lee of the reef and settles out and stops moving and builds a beach. So reefs are protective. They help a beach form behind them along shore. They can also be designed for those of us that surf to provide a good surfing opportunity on the reef. So the Australians, they're called multi-purpose reefs. You put the reef in to block waves and reduce the energy on the shore and build a beach, but also make a surfing opportunity, a habitat, hard bottom habitat as well for fish, kelp, etc., and a diving opportunity. So there's all sorts of fun stuff that can be done on the reef.
If you could take nothing else away from today, it's obvious that we need a comprehensive plan to make our city as resilient as possible in the face of what's coming. And by that, I don't mean a plan for the groins, don't mean a plan for the bulkheads, but a comprehensive plan that really takes that overview. And it can't be a plan just from the staff, and it can't be a plan even from the council. It has to be a plan that the community embraces because it's so big. There's a lot of dollars attached to it, and it's very existential. And I see two main problems and challenges in creating the plan. The first is I was in a meeting a month or so ago. This subject came up, and the man who lives in Harborview Hills said, "Not my problem. And my tax dollars should not go to protect private property." And I will bet any amount of money he's not the only one that feels that way in the city. So that's a challenge we have to look at. And I think the other big one is what we touched Chris in particular commented on, is people are going to say, well, you can't plan because you don't know. And they're right. We don't. We do know sea level rise, but how much and when? This isn't a public works project. Public works, okay, this pavement, this kind of usage lasts this many years, and they plug in the replacement date to the capital improvement program. We don't have that luxury because there's so much uncertainty. And I do think, though, we have ways of dealing with that uncertainty in the way we structure our plan. And the best one I've seen is coming out of Stanford's Coastal Solutions, which is a system of triggers. So when A happens, we do B. When C happens, we do D. But we don't do D until or unless C happens. So in other words, we anticipate, these are the various scenarios, but we don't overcompensate by saying, well, worst case scenario is this, and we go from A to C. I think in that way, we can at least counter some of that uncertainty. But, as I said, we need a plan, and we need it to be embraced. This group, SPON, can play an important part. SPON has a long history of building coalitions and crafting messages that move issues forward. But we can't leave it just to a group. We really all have to be involved in this because, as I said, the community is going to have to embrace it. Not just the people who live on the peninsula, but the people that live up like I, I lived in Front-on-Mar, we always laughed. Balboa, you're the new Atlantis. We now are waterfront property. That's really not a very neighborly attitude. So we all have to be together. For individuals, the easiest way is to get involved in the general plan process, which we're updating right now. And just to remind you, the general plan is being drafted by the General Plan Advisory Committee. 30 residents selected because of their difference in backgrounds and ages, trying to be as representative of the city as possible. But they are 30 people. They need and they want your thoughts. And it's very simple. Meetings are open to the public. They're listed on the city calendar. But even easier is to go to the city's website, type in Newport Together. And that takes you to the general plan area where the general plan will have to deal with this issue. And you can sign up for notifications. You can make comments on issues and has all the policies proposed and the studies that go behind that. So this is really important. It is, forgive me, a watershed moment in our city's life. We really need to be looking now. Again, we don't need a plan until 2034. Hey, I think we should have had a plan a decade ago. We really want to be thinking of the future, and we want to be had as much involvement as possible. So once again, thanks to SPON for starting this conversation, really getting it out into our consciousness. And we need to continue. It's critical that we continue this conversation. And I would say let's start right now.